So I'm the last CFO to ever do an M&A transaction with Lehman Brothers. And most of the businesses that are for sale are,
Sale for a
problems
reason.
disguised as opportunities, not opportunities disguised as problems. All net new jobs are created by startups. Big companies create some jobs, but they also destroy jobs and lay people off. The humility of being a founder, I think, makes you a better angel when you know just how hard it is to do. Now every startup pitch deck has AI in it. And our job as investors is to figure out which companies are really AI first.
Hello, everyone. Daniel Kube here, and here's another session of Executive Conversations. And I'm lucky to have an old friend of mine join who's had an even more interesting career path than me, I would say, just given all the different things he's done. It's Christopher Mirabile. Christopher and I met, dating ourselves, but I had just finished a stint with PricewaterhouseCoopers working in Southeast Asia doing tech transfers. And I joined this amazing company out of Boston called IONA Technologies. And Christopher was the legal counsel. And IONA was, I think, the second largest IPO on NASDAQ. It was the dominating core force in the world at the point in time. Really interesting journey. Crazy highlights included our Java One party having Spinal Tap as the band and our CEO up on the stage. So lots of great fun. And IONA has subsequently actually seeded a whole bunch of other companies globally. But Christopher, this is for you to talk about your journey because you've actually transformed yourself several times and in several ways, and even in your latest chapter. But it would be great if you could share, your voyage and some of the key sort of inflection points. And, you're also a big believer in giving back. You've been really heavily involved in the angel community, not only as an investor, but helping mentor and help, guide young companies to make them successful, which is huge. So yeah, I'd love to hear it from you, and we'll take the conversation, and ebb it and float a couple of different ways.
This must be a great podcast because I've already learned something. I didn't realize we had Price Waterhouse in common. I was a PW guy as well back before Cooper's even.
Yeah.
But yes, I was.
I'm Cooper's, by the way.
Oh, you're Cooper's. Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep going anyway. The
I won't hold it against me.
I remember PW in Chicago. It was like late 80s, and we all wore charcoal colored suits, and all the Arthur Anderson people wore blue suits. And when we ran into each other in restaurants downtown in the Loop, we kind of wouldn't want to sit near each other. It was quite a rivalry. Too bad for Enron. Those guys imploded because of that. But anyway, it's funny now that I think about it. It's really kind of a full circle. I was an English major, and I ended up going into strategy consulting at Price Waterhouse back in the days when the big accounting firms could do that kind of strategy work before the Sarbanes-Oxley rules changes. And it was something of a black sheep. There were 12 at my level, the sort of cannon fodder level. Like the people were just sent everywhere, sent into the trenches. And there were 12 of us. 10 went back to B school, and 2 of us went to law school. And I was one of the 2 who went to law school. And I took a really a business-focused law degree. That was really kind of what I wanted to do. I mean, I had thought about going to business school and even did better on the GMATs than the LSATs. But I just thought to myself, law is such a flexible and interesting body of knowledge. And it's so many Fortune 500, CEOs had come up through the legal side. Isn't going to limit me. I could probably take it anywhere I wanted. And I'd always had, people pinching my cheek and saying, you've got the gift of gab. You should be a lawyer. So I decided to study, and I ended up right at the dawn of the internet era, right? I mean, popping out in Boston, which was a real hotbed in those days, still is. And I ended up in a very, very busy corporate firm. The firm has since shut down, and most of the lawyers from the firm ended up at Goodwin Procter or Choate. But it was called Tester, Horowitz, and Tebow. And I think my last year there was 1997. The internet was really booming. I think we did 51 or 52 underwritten public offerings and over half of the venture capital fund formations in the world with 125 corporate lawyers. I mean, it was crazy how busy it was. And that's how I got connected with our company, IONA, the one you and I overlapped at. I took IONA public as a client and then ended up going in-house. And that was a really welcome transition career-wise because, being in any service industry is hard, right? Where you're kind of having to, bill for your time and sort of juggle multiple clients and make every client feel special. And it's really a level of abstraction because you're not really that close to the work. And going in-house was my happiest years as a lawyer. By the time it all wound down at IONA and we sold it, I think I was the longest tenured employee in the US, having been there, I don't know, 11 or 12 years at that point when we sold the company. But I loved being in-house. It was a great mix of, regulatory, stock market compliance, securities law, intellectual property, all those kinds of things. But obviously the bread and butter was doing sales deals and negotiating licenses. And it's very different nowadays. Back then, people negotiated licenses. It wasn't a click wrap, SaaS, subscription kind of a world where so much software is. Not all of it, but much of it is. And so I think, at Iona, over 90% of our revenue was negotiated license deals. And we did some pretty complicated deals. It was a kind of a complicated area, as you've told your podcast listeners many times before, I'm sure. But, it was a first really robust implementation of a very complicated standard that was a standard focused on heavy iron, right? Heavy duty enterprise companies tying together sort of islands of automation. So we got into we were big in investment banking and telco and insurance, government manufacturing, aerospace, defense. So it was a crazy time, and we had a lot of all-nighters trying to get that last deal done and make the numbers for the quarter. And it was 44 quarters in a row that I was there. Ultimately took over the global, legal function worldwide. And then for reasons that may be beyond the scope of our conversation today, I ended up taking over as the CFO of the company and led its sale in a public-to-public acquisition. And there's actually, I don't know if you remember, Daniel, but there's a pretty great story, apocryphal legend about that sale I'd be happy to share.
Sure.
So Lehman Brothers took us public, and they were representing us in the sale of the company. And it really was the financial crisis of 2008 that led to the sale of the company ultimately, because, we were having some challenges replicating our success with web services, right? I mean, the Kube common object request broker architecture was hardcore standards-based middleware, written in like C++. And the world kind of moved towards web services and service-oriented architectures. And we were sort of trying to revisit the greatest hits, but using a lighter, looser standard. And that was not, it was a fast moving world, and it was not as clearly good of a fit for the heavy customers like Goldman Sachs and so forth. So, the company was trying to figure out its way forward, and financial services was a big, big sector for us. And we had a deal go south with Merrill Lynch and a deal go south they both got delayed with Visa, the credit card issuer. And so we missed our earnings projection by about 10% and pre-announced our earnings and had to lay off a few people. I was a CFO. We were kind of tightening our belts and still, giving relatively positive guidance. And that caused a European competitor to give us a bear hug. They came and hired some bankers and said they wanted to acquire us. And we ended up, their bankers in London leaked, and it got out and affected the Irish Stock Exchange, where we were listed in addition to our listing on NASDAQ. And so it put the company in play. And a lot of the sales people started putting their resumes out. It was kind of chaotic. But in any event, we retained Lehman Brothers, and we ran a process. And I think in the end, we had about 10 financial buyers and about 20 strategic buyers who looked at the company. And it was a complicated deal involving a really, really long proxy. There was a lawsuit. The ultimate buyer had to sue to even get in the deal. But we fought and got through this whole thing in the summer of 2008. And during that time, the process was really gearing up in March, and Bear Stearns went under. They got bought for $2 a share. And I remember that image of the $2 bill taped to the front door of Bear Stearns. And then, all the auction rate securities are failing. And as we're going, AIG every week they're saying they're another $10 billion short on where they need to be to shore up their finances. And the world was just kind of going crazy. We got our proxy filed in June, and we were trying to get this deal closed. And I'm flying back and forth to Ireland and a meeting with the shareholders. And IONA was it was a Celtic Tiger, right? It was a really big company. It was in all the pension funds in Ireland and millions of retirees and so forth. So it was crazy. And everyone was coming to the annual general meeting, and I get the vote, I get the thing done. I'm just so jet lagged and exhausted from this transaction. And I get the vote, and we close the transaction on like the second Friday in September of 2008, and Lehman Brothers goes bankrupt on Saturday. So I'm the last CFO to ever do an M&A transaction with Lehman Brothers. In fact, when we wired the transaction fee to Lehman Brothers, the trustee had possession of the account we wired it to. It was pretty crazy times. And the buyer took over, and, the software, they continued to support the customers, which is what we wanted. And it wasn't .com era valuation, but it was a really good outcome for the shareholders and for the employees. And
considering the environment, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it was the fact it was like, running out of a burning building, because by the time, that fall, the world had completely changed. And that actually brings us back in some ways to the career. I'm happy to talk about the IONA days if you want to go back there, but career-wise, it really provided a big pivot for me, and I'm happy to unpack that if you want.
Yeah, I would love to, because I know, because you and I have stayed in touch, but you helped build, and we're one of the early stage beneficiaries and participants in, an amazing Boston Angel group. You created some really cool companies, or helped create some that you were pretty heavily involved in, even though you're an investor. Take us through that chapter, and also, and how do you get involved with the SEC with all this crazy, how did that ever come to pass? That was just a weird
it's all kind of connected. In the benefit of hindsight, it looks like it was planned, but nothing's ever planned, right? So I popped out by the time my consulting agreement to stay on and help the merger transition. And I sort of popped out at the end of 2008, early 2009, sort of at the bottom of the worst route in history in cash. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. I sort of had my IONA proceeds, and I was just thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I didn't, I think I was very clear in my mind that I had just walked away from one of the best in-house general counsel jobs I was ever going to have. And I didn't want to do that again. And the market was very, very unpleasant for that kind of work at that time. And I just kind of thought about, what interested me, sort of that, what's next, what's new, being on the cutting edge. And I worked with a buyer's broker, and I thought about buying a business. I looked at a few businesses, and I realized that most of the businesses that are for sale are, problems disguised as opportunities, not opportunities disguised as problems. And so I thought, a portfolio kind of approach is better. And as my networking in 2009 kind of evolved, I kept coming back to the idea of really getting more involved in the early stage stuff as sort of a great way to learn and participate. And, selfishly, I was sort of thinking to myself, I want my kids to be able to get jobs in Boston. I want to invest in this community and what I think makes them one of the greatest cities in the world great. And so a lot of my networking sort of started to focus on the early stage stuff. And I thought about, raising a fund and being a fund manager, which I subsequently did a few small funds. But at that time, I kind of wanted to get my hands dirty. And so as I was learning more about the early stage space and just realizing that how important startups were to the economy, in the US, all net new jobs are created by startups. Big companies create some jobs, but they also destroy jobs and lay people off and so forth. When you look at net new jobs created in the US, that margin is startups. And when you realize how important startups are to job creation, national competitiveness, industrial policy, opportunity on Main Street, it used to be that getting a college degree was like a social escalator. And that's still true, but much less powerfully true than it used to be. And startups are a tremendous elevator for people to get involved and have opportunity, and startups are much more accommodating of people, different abilities and walks of life and so forth. So as I started to realize how important startups were, I was a little bit horrified by how unprofessional funding them really was. And I looked around, the angel world had always existed, but it was not very organized and systematized or particularly professional. And Boston was a real hotbed and had a lot of groups, but I didn't think they were really doing it as professionally as it could be done. And one of the established groups that it was, up and running at that time was a group called Launchpad. And I got to know the founder really well, and he was helping me with a little angel side project. And I got my own little group up and running. And he said, "Let's merge, and you can take over being on the leadership team. We'll sort of, I'll mentor and train you, and you'll take it over." And we set out to really build Launchpad with a very clear mission to professionalize early stage investing. And that took 2 or 3 key forms. One was developing a really professional culture and a very strong membership base, and really bringing rigorous professionalism to how we recruit companies, evaluate companies, do deals, really strong focus on thoughtful.
Maybe talk. One of the things I always thought was so interesting, because as you know, I've been a member of a bunch of angel groups as well, and I've always been a proponent of the model you built. But your investors in the angel groups had to participate, and you had a wait, and you had a set number. I think you had a cap on your numbers, but there was a sort of an active agenda that anyone who joined had to follow through with, and I think
Yeah,
that really helped your outcomes.
it did. I mean, we ended up, and we still to this day enjoy a culture of really lean forward people. And we've had a wait list. It's probably 10 years now that, there's been a little bit of a wait to get a guest chair and then get an interview and get involved in the group. And we're super, super clear that it's a pretty big commitment of time. And, you see different models in running angel groups. And a model that's always had some segment of the market and pretty popular is sort of a fund model. And it has some advantages in that, the check size and the money is there, and one person can make the decision. But the problem with it is that it defeats one of the best things about angel investing, which is pooling minds and pooling contacts and pooling knowledge. And so the other way you can run an angel group is as a network, where each angel makes his or her own decision about what they're going to invest in. The problem with the network model, and the problem that Ham Lord and I set out to fix while we professionalized Launchpad, is there some way we could get the benefits of the network model that drives active investors who are building their own two-legged portfolio, and yet have it feel and experience as very, very crisp and efficient and professional for the entrepreneur? And the answer is a really strong culture, a selective, thoughtful membership criteria that really filter out people who just aren't going to have time for it and maybe would make more sense in a fund or whatever the case may be. And really creating a culture of getting involved and helping and responding to documents quickly and so forth. And the other thing that we had done some studies and determined that returns are really, really affected by full capital staging and managing post monies after deals carefully, and thinking about where the capital is going to come from and how much a company should take, rather than just forcing the greatest amount of capital into a company, and governance. And so we realized that if we want to dictate the terms of deals and be involved in governance, we needed to lead deals. And that really became kind of our hallmark: priced equity deals that we led and syndicated, and ended up being involved in the governance of the company. So I think we have over 40 people who sit in boardrooms for us. So in any event, that was kind of the culture we were trying to build, and we had the privilege of working with many great Canadian angels over the years. I've done cross-border deals and know your group and other groups up there, and it's been an incredible ride. I think we've backed somewhere in the ballpark of 150 or 160 companies, and really, really proud that 53% of our companies have female or minority leadership and had really consistent returns, kind of more of a Moneyball approach, not chasing, the next .com, global unicorn, but really focusing on companies that are led by really thoughtful, talented people and focusing on hard problems that are important to a good number of people. So much more of a sort of enterprise and healthcare and sort of need to have rather than nice to have product categories. Nothing wrong with nice to have products, but we've always been really drawn to the stuff that's less sexy, but it's serious pain relief for the enterprise or the healthcare. That's been spectacular. I mean, it's just been super fun.
Yeah.
So I'll pause there and let you
But
jump
how
in.
did that segue into the securities and the angel chair role? And what were the key learning? What did you get out of these things the most? Like angels, it's nice to hear an angel group that actually makes money. That's a huge plus because a lot of it's like, a lot of what's charity work in a lot of cases, sometimes financial as well.
Yeah. Well, so actually, your question triggers me to sort of say, so, if the mission is professionalizing, one of the pillars of that was how we ran it. And this is the answer to your question, so just bear with me. The second pillar was trying to remedy the appalling tool situation. They're, trying to run an angel portfolio or an angel group portfolio on a spreadsheet's really, really hard. And we couldn't believe there was nothing out there. And so we set out to build a tool to make that easier. People wanted to try it. We got lots of feature requests. And so we basically offered it as a commercial SaaS tool, really to fund the product roadmap and build the features that people were requesting. And that was a company called Seraph, Seraf, and I think it's seraph.io now. And that grew and was a great founder experience for us, right? The humility of being a founder, I think, makes you a better angel when you know just how hard it is to do. I think you appreciate what the founders are going through in a way that it's too abstract if you don't. And so Seraph grew, became profitable, and we ended up selling it a few years ago to a small private equity firm. And so it's still thriving and doing great in the market, sort of managing alternative portfolios. And we did a lot of education. The reason it was sort of the third or the second of the three pillars was the industry needed the tools. We wrote 7 books, plus a whole bunch of courses, did a lot of blogging, and really used Seraph as an educational platform. Ultimately, the courses that we developed were licensed by the Angel Capital Association as the foundation for the Bill Payne, Angel University. And that ACA stuff was the third pillar. In addition to sort of running Launchpad in a way that served as an example and building the Seraph tools and doing the education, getting involved in the Angel Capital Association was really the third thing. And that's what led to the SEC ultimately.
Yeah,
but
and just a shout out. So I was serial entrepreneuring while you were doing these other things and building other companies. And I have my ICD and like my corporate director's sort of certification. But the problem is the content for the ICD and the board level training was so big business, it didn't relate to an angel board. And the stuff
Yeah.
that you guys put out was so useful to help board members really recalibrate to the realities of being in an early stage because it's so hard and it was so I'm just saying that content was really, really appreciated and useful at those points in time.
That's great. I'm glad it helped. We got a lot of feedback from all over the world. Seraph had pockets of customers in sub-Saharan Africa and in Scotland and all over Europe and the US. But getting involved in the Angel Capital Association was really the third piece of it. And it really was about professionalizing Launchpad and giving back to the community. community. And so I ended up serving, doing a lot of public policy work at the ACA, given my securities lawyer background, being involved in membership and marketing, and then, ultimately took over as the chair. I was the vice chair for a few years, and then I was the chair, and I'm still chair emeritus, and I'm still involved in the board, although on a non-voting basis. And those close relationships are kind of why they knew about our content and ended up building the university on that. But during the course of the public policy work, we would go to Washington fairly regularly, and we're pretty close to the kinds of issues, often tax issues, but sometimes regulatory kinds of stuff that affected the formation of capital at the lowest level in the US. And got to know some folks at Commerce, talked to the SEC folks a lot, got to know a lot of senators and Congress people. And so we were kind of in the inside track and knew that the SEC was dealing with this investor advisory committee and that there was an opening there. And the IAC was created in 2009 under Dodd-Frank by Congress, and it mandates that this committee exist and give advice to the SEC in two areas. One is feedback on current and proposed rules, and the other is areas that maybe aren't in the spotlight and ought to get more attention. And it was pretty wonky stuff. I was ultimately chaired a couple of the subcommittees and then became the chair of the IAC, and I had the pleasure of getting to know all the commissioners and the chair. Gensler was the chair at the time. Yeah. And it was an opportunity to really think about the public markets and how they affect the formation of capital and make sure that they serve smaller companies better. It coincides with this great reduction in the number of public companies, much, much harder to go public. And a lot of companies were staying private longer, which meant that only certain big funds like Fidelity and Tiger Global, these late stage funds, were really reaping all the profits. So by the time a company went public, there wasn't any real upside priced into it. And so, it was just basically a shift in value from Wall Street and Main Street investors to big firms. And so it was an opportunity to kind of look out for entrepreneurship a little bit.
So I'm going to pivot a bit on this because, which is really actually quite refreshing, this conversation so far, because we've been talking for 43 minutes, and I don't think we mentioned LLMs or AI yet, which is amazing, which is great, by the way. But by the same token, I would love for you to put your investor lens on, because you've been seeing pitches from early stage. You've been dealing with some organizations that have pretty significant market sophistication for later stage funding. And the nature of the pitch deck and the nature of the entrepreneur is going to change radically, especially when it comes to anything related to SaaS or software. Not that it's going to be eliminated, but the nature of having a team of 30 developers to get successful, or a team of 5. How do you see that playing out in the angel and early stage world? And also at the higher level, as organizations are right sizing because these agents are just so much better and higher quality in specific functions, there's going to be a whole bunch of untold impacts. So one, on the highest level, big organizations letting go talent, but two, how does that impact the whole new angel community? Because one of the things that I've seen in the meetings that I've been going to, that I still believe there's a lag with a lot of entrepreneurs who haven't caught this wave because they were so busy in the trenches thinking about things the old way. And I think the new way is changing and transforming so fast. I just love to get some of your high level observations. And also, talking to my son, he's an entrepreneurial kid. He wants to do his own thing, start his own business. What are you counseling the young entrepreneurs with, and what are you seeing come across the table?
Are you sure that you're not talking to Christopher Bot and not Christopher? You didn't give me one of those capachas or something
exactly.
At the beginning. So many thoughts. I think I agree with everything you just said. I think that we are at a really interesting time in terms of technology, and it's welcome in some ways because the internet was such a locomotive of just pulling a huge train of company and value creation, right? And mobile was sort of the next really big wave. And to some degree, client service and, the cloud and that stuff. But we've sort of been looking for the next really big thing. And there is no doubt in my mind that AI is going to have a massive impact on life as we know it. I'm not one of those people saying, oh, AI is going to be really big. It's going to be really successful. It's going to be, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's going to be massively impactful. And I'm talking about impactful on a level equal to or greater than the internet and the smartphone in terms of how it's going to change life. I mean, try to imagine a day without the internet or your smartphone. I mean, or both at the same time. For example, getting a hold of your doctor. You look up the phone number on the web. You fill out a form on the web. You send your follow-up on their web, patient portal. I mean, nothing could be done. In fact, my wife got separated from her laptop due to some travel stuff. I think she's in her third week living off of her phone without her laptop, and it's not always as easy, right?
Yeah.
But you can do
But
it.
she is.
And there is no doubt in my mind. I don't know whether these LLMs are going to run out of gas. I think there is a place for them because they're so intrinsically language based that they're going to be a great interface to humans who are language-based creatures, and they're so adaptable to different languages and so forth. So I think LLMs are a pretty cool technology. I think they're a little compute expensive right now, and that has impacts on the electric grid and the environment and water and so forth. And I think probably we're going to see a lot more of the compute pushed out to the edge of the network. And I think that we may look back at this time and think that Apple might have had known something other people didn't know or ended up in a better position. Everyone's saying, oh, Apple's behind because they didn't spend $1 trillion developing their own LLM. And I'm not 100% sure that's correct. And I think that we're going to end up with a lot of the compute on the device in the hand.
It's way more efficient. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, we don't need to get into it, right? But there's a lot of reasons why that makes sense, just including latency and backhaul and transport and you name it. And probably there's going to be a place for the cloud, right? The cutting edge models, frontier models, things that make more sense with more infrastructure, more parallelization, and it's going to evolve. And so I don't know whether LLMs are going to achieve artificial general intelligence. I think that's going to be tricky to do. There may be some breakthroughs, whatever. But I think that the toothpaste is out of the tube and that AI is changing the world as we know it. And it's changing all sorts of the kinds of things you talked about, right? Just like the value of a SaaS company, the value of software, how hard it is to make software, what is going to differentiate tomorrow's software startups. It's a completely different ballgame. And, it's reminiscent of, like, I don't know if you remember back in the IONA days, I don't know if you ever went to the Waltham office, but there was a startup in our building and they parked their fleet of vans at the top of the parking garage that we could see out our window. And it was like 25 gleaming white vans, all with aluminum racks and logos, and there was some .com related thing where if you wanted to start a startup back then, you had to pay shit ton a month for a fractional T1 line. You had to buy all these servers. You had to hire all these people to do it, right? And it was crazy. And then programming the web, it got a lot more efficient and so forth. I think that we are going to see software development teams impacted greatly. And the human creativity is going to end up concentrated in big picture stuff and in design stuff and in innovating and just basic code creation and code annotation and code management. Probably some of the DevOps stuff is going to be handleable by AI. And that's just one tiny part of the impact, right? It's going to really shred education. It already is causing tremendous turmoil up and down the education ladder. We're seeing a tremendous amount of deal flow with AI in healthcare.
That's the big promised land.
Yeah, we're backing a company that's using, one of the issues in the United States is that we have a very sophisticated medical system, but when you get out of the really big city centers access to specialists can be hard. And like, so for example, a ton of like the dermatology, front lines are handled by general practitioners in small towns who may or may not have they don't have dermatology training, and they might not be able to spot when someone who works in agriculture has been out in the sun too long and has skin cancer
They
developing,
skipped
right?
that class.
And so these guys, this company is allowing GPs to use AI to figure out when something needs to be referred to a specialist. And it's worth making the drive to Des Moines or wherever and get in and get looked at. So I think it's going to have a massive impact. And it's beyond just the buzzword compliance that we saw in DEX with machine language. And, there were so many little false starts. Now every startup pitch deck has AI in it. And our job as investors is to figure out which companies are really AI first and which companies are still treating it like buzzword compliance or like a feature they can bolt onto their product as opposed to re-engineer their product to put it at the center.
So I think, I'm seeing a second edition of this, but I would really like to sort of wrap up on a couple thoughts around. So you've had some good economic success along the way, and you've been really focusing in the past 10 years on things that really you derive a lot of enjoyment from. And you've had a real, actually, as you said earlier in our pre-discussion, you're back to your roots now in this next chapter. But it would be cool for you to maybe sort of share your thought process on how you manage the change and what you're focusing on now and why you're doing it, and the joy that it's actually bringing you. Because I think, a lot of people in this market may be forced to make some of these decisions prematurely because of AI. And also, I think it's just important. I think you're really grounded with a really great approach on moving your life. So it'd be cool for you to share that.
Yeah, so sure. So you're very generous. Like I said, it only looks like there's a plan. There's not actually a plan. But really what it's about is running Launchpad at the level of complexity. It's 185 investors backing a tremendous number. We do 25 to 30 rounds of financing a year. So I'm passionate about the impact Launchpad's having. We're putting $10 million to work a year in pre-seed stage startups. Super, super important. It's a burnout job. I ran it for 10 or 11 years. I want Launchpad to be thriving 30 years from now, which means I've got to be focused on talent succession and thinking about leadership and protecting the culture. The last few years have been about me bringing in successors, empowering them to carry the culture, carry the torch forward, and so forth. And so I've gradually been extracting. I'm still the executive chair, and I still really enjoy being involved in the member training and many diligence, many aspects of it. I'm still a very, very active member, but I've tried to kind of get my hands out of the day-to-day stuff, which has freed me up to really focus on love of the game, right? Startups, the mentoring. I can get back to a little bit more one-to-one mentoring. When I was so busy running Launchpad, I really could only do one-to-many. I couldn't take invitations to work with individuals. So getting back to some of those roots, and it's also given me a chance to think about kind of what's left on the checklist, things I wanted to do. And I'm someone who, back from the earliest days in high school and in college when I was an English major, I just always assumed I would write novels. And I've written a lot of nonfiction. And when the first time I tried to write a novel in my 20s was frankly just embarrassing. I mean, embarrassing to the point of like humiliating. It was so bad. And it's not that I couldn't write. It's just that I didn't have any life experience. I didn't know shit from shinola, as they say. And so I spent a lot of the time in the pandemic. Our daughter went to college down in the deep South in New Orleans. And my wife and I had dogs, and COVID made flying difficult. So we ended up getting an off-road camper van, a Sprinter van that was lifted in four-wheel drive. And we traveled all over, took our dogs to 49 states and almost all of the national parks and so forth. And I spent a lot of that windshield time thinking about the next chapter. And I use that word advisedly as a pun, right? So I've finally been able to free up enough time to get to that unchecked checkbox, which was the writing novels. And it's actually, we're having this recording at a really, really important moment. My first book is going into pre-order next month. And the second book is deep in the editing phase, and I've already spent some time planning the third and fourth books in this series. So I'll just end by saying that it's the Silas Lopez Mysteries is the series, and you can sign up and learn about why I thought it was important in this current moment in time to kind of create this hero, this uncommonly decent guy, by going to author ChristopherMirabile.com. And if you go there, you can sign up for my announcements thread and newsletter and so forth. So the book stuff has just been much more entrepreneurial than I expected, so much more work than I expected. And it's a fight every day to get time to really write and be focused on the creativity as opposed to just the marketing and the business side of the business.
Yeah. And enjoyment factor, like, is this turned on your intrinsic satisfaction again, or like?
Yeah, never been happier. It is, I think the key to long-term happiness for your listeners is to always be learning, is be a lifelong learner and try to add skills. And so this has been deeply, deeply satisfying just in terms of like how much I've had to learn and tools and techniques and stuff, and just how to write creatively. But there's also just been the satisfaction of the creative outlet and taking a picture that's in your mind and recreating it on the page in words. And it's been a real joy building these characters, because book 2 was less about building the character and more about just putting them in situations and watching them how they reacted. And so I'm really, really,
I'm looking
really
for,
pleased.
I would love to have a new hero, because there's a lot of anti-heroes going on right now.
Yeah, and that was sort of the thinking.
Uh,
Could we build somebody who really celebrates just uncommon decency?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great note to end on. Anyways, Christopher, thank you very much. I think I will take, because we missed a bunch of stuff, but there's so much here. And just your perspective is always refreshing. Awesome.
Well,
Thanks.
if your listeners want me to come back, I guess they need to leave comments or something
Oh
in
yeah,
your
so that's one
YouTube.
thing.
Or
Yeah,
yeah,
so what would be one, so one of the things I did want to raise, what would be one of the big open questions you think we as business leaders really need to think about and address? You don't have to have the answers. Like, what's the one thing you think we haven't solved that we really need to solve in the near term?
I guess I think the really, really big picture question is how to reconcile the need for growth, right, with outcomes that aren't so destructive. I mean, capitalism is fabulous in terms of the way in which it aligns incentives and creates growth and jobs and products and services we need to save lives. But it's also somewhat of a, have you ever seen those TikToks where the thing that's supposed to smooth the cement gets loose and the handle is
Yes.
flying around, right? And no one can get near it,
Yeah.
because they don't want to get their femur
Yeah.
broken by the handle of this thing.
Or a post hole digger. I've had that situation with the post hole digger where I lost it
Yeah,
sitting in the
well,
hole.
capitalism is a little bit like that, right? Where it's how do we create all the goodness and all the thing with outcomes that aren't externalizing costs so much, because we're externalizing a lot of costs and it's impacting people who have the least ability to defend themselves or protect themselves from those
Yeah.
impacts. So
Yeah. I
there's
really
work to
think,
be done there.
yeah, I think that's a great, and also, just plays to your trend of your hero, decency. We need a
Yeah.
lot more of that in the world,
Yeah,
right?
it's a
Yeah,
challenge. We haven't figured it out, and I guess our kids' generation will figure it out. I don't know.
yeah. They will have their hands full.
Anyway,
Anyways,
really
awesome.
nice excuse to catch up with you, Daniel, and thank you
Yeah.
for having me on.